And BookTV is on location in Las Vegas at the annual FreedomFest conference. And we are interviewing several different authors here. And we're pleased to be joined now by the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party for Vice President of the United States, Judge James Gray, who is also an author. And his book is called Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It. Judge Gray, if we could, though, start with your background. Tell us your background. Tell us about yourself.
Well, sure. I was in UCLA, go Bruins, that sort of thing, and then I was in the Peace Corps 2 years in Costa Rica. And by the way, you say I'm the vice presidential nominee from the Libertarian Party. I will be the first Peace Corps volunteer ever to be elected to a national office, and that's kind of pleasing. After that, I went to USC Law School, was being drafted, so I joined the Naval ROTC and then was a Navy attorney, Navy JAG attorney for 4 years. And did
Is that during Vietnam?
Same stuff. It was during Vietnam. That's why I was being drafted, actually. Within a week of getting back from the Peace Corps, I received my 1A classification and notice for physical, so guess what my future had in store for me. After I got out of the Navy, I was a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles, U.S. Attorney's Office, prosecuted the standard cases, bank robberies, drug cases, didn't really think about it much. Ended up heading a unit prosecuting frauds against the government, FHA, VA, that sort of thing. After that was in the private practice of law, business litigation for 5 years, and then was appointed to the bench. So I was on the bench for 25 years as a judge, and now I'm retired and I'm running, as you say, for office.
Well, what court were you a judge at?
It was Superior Court in Orange County, California, where it's the state court, and over 25 years pretty much did everything. And as a part of that, see churning low-level drug offenders through the system for no good purpose, and eventually, in fact, it didn't take too long. I saw that what we're doing simply isn't working. In fact, the tougher we get on drug crime, the softer we get with regard to the prosecution of everything else. So robbers, rapers, murderers were actually being able to skate and get a lot less accountability because we're spending all these efforts on the prosecution of nonviolent drug offenses. It just doesn't work.
So what was your attitude toward drug lawbreakers, I guess?
Well, you have to uphold the laws, and I raised my hand to protect and defend the constitutions and as well as the state laws. That doesn't mean I have to do it privately or do it quietly. So I would do that, but you can't escape drug cases. You're in juvenile court, well, drug is involved. You're in probate, you can't escape them. But nevertheless, I kind of see myself as a bearded outside agitator in disguise, in effect, because what we're doing here isn't working, and we simply have to put our heads together and change it. We couldn't do it worse if we tried. I mean, ask Mexico, for example. That's 60,000 people died a violent death in the last 5 or 6 years because of President Calderon's war on drugs, and it has nothing to do with drugs. It has everything to do with drug money, and it's our drug money that's causing those deaths and corruption and lack of respect for the law.
Judge Gray, was there any particular drug case that kind of crystallized your thinking?
There kind of was, although it was building up. I still remember that I was carrying out another judge's sentence, and we had a really bad guy who was charged with and pleading to going out with prostitutes, beating them up, raping them, and stealing their money. And by the time all the dust settled and he had some credit for time served, he'd only serve another 2 weeks in jail before he would be released. And when he was taken back to lockup after going through all of this, he gave out a war whoop as if he'd won. And I can remember thinking to myself, he has won, because we're so involved with nonviolent drug cases, using our resources for that really bad guys are escaping. So I realized that, the tougher you get on nonviolent drug offenses, literally the softer you get with regard to the prosecution of everything else. I'm going to do something about it, and I have.
What have you done?
Well, I talk about this publicly. I have, as publicly as I can. I've been on the O'Reilly Factor a couple of times, and John Stossel special, something in the order of 700 or 800 various media events. I've written a book about it that actually was on BookTV about 10 years ago when it came out in 2001. Now it's updated at the beginning of this year, 2012. So I'm back on BookTV talking about this issue, among others.
And here's the cover of the second edition. Specifically, what are one or two things about the U.S. drug laws or state drug laws that you would change immediately?
Well, the answer is hold people accountable for what they do, not what they put into their bodies. The criminal justice system is very able to, for example, if I drive a motor vehicle under the influence, that's a crime and should be. Why? Well, because now by my actions, I'm putting your safety at risk. But as far as putting people in jail for what they choose to put into their bodies, number one, it doesn't work. And I'm a libertarian too, and I'm proud of that, and most people are. The government has as much right to control what you or I as adults put into our bodies as it does what I put into my mind. It's none of their business. So it doesn't work, and you are actually so contributing to problems, because 90% of our so-called drug problems today are drug prohibition problems. That's not to minimize the drug harms themselves, but a huge amount are drug prohibition problems, just like when we had with alcohol prohibition. The bathtub gin problem, for example, the quality control went away when we repealed alcohol prohibition. Al Capone was no longer involved in selling drugs. Today, you do not find children selling selling alcohol to each other in their high school campuses, but they're selling marijuana, ecstasy, or whatever all the time. Why? Because of drug prohibition. So we're corrupting our children by the perpetuation of this truly failed policy.
Okay. Arguments against it include children shouldn't be taking ecstasy,
Sure, I
or
agree
teens
with that.
should not be taking ecstasy.
I agree with that.
Heroin addiction,
All of that.
marijuana use the same as alcohol.
Sure.
I mean, should marijuana be treated the same as alcohol?
Yes, and in fact there is an initiative in Colorado now that Governor Johnson and I in our campaign have endorsed. Same thing in the state of Washington that talks about this. Thank you for this other
We'll show that
book
in just
as
a
well,
second.
but sure. Again, the drugs are here to stay. So I agree that children should not be doing this, but ask our children today, what is easier for you to get, marijuana or alcohol? You ask the first 10 teenagers you find, they'll all tell you, it's easier for me to get marijuana. Why? Because the illegal dealers don't ask for ID. So today, think about it. The biggest oxymoron of our lives today is the term controlled substances. Why? Because as soon as you prohibit something, you give up all of your control with regard to place of sale or quantity or quality or price or age restrictions. All of that is abandoned to the bad guys, to the thugs, to the Mexican drug cartels. Most juvenile gangs in our country have their biggest source of revenue from what? The sale of illegal drugs. Let's cripple drug cartels, let's cripple juvenile gangs by repealing drug prohibition. Regulate marijuana like wine is the place to start.
Judge Gray, would you have marijuana, et cetera, sold in retail stores and
Treat it
taxed?
like wine. Yes, just treat it like wine, and that's the answer for most questions. Could you grow your own? Well, you can grow your own grapes and make your own wine. Treat it that way. For responsible adults, yes, and tax it. Wouldn't it be better to have these huge amounts of money go actually to pay our firefighters and our teachers, fix our roads, instead of funding juvenile gangs and Mexican drug cartels? It's a really easy question to answer.
Two of the people that you dedicate this book to are George Shultz and the late William F. Buckley.
You know, that's right. And I'm proud to be in that. In fact, you can go on to say that this was endorsed by Milton Friedman, who's a hero of mine. Also, of course, Walter Cronkite, who is a real hero in a lot of other ways. And George Shultz, like you say, the former Secretary of State for Ronald Reagan, no man's liberal. But you get those folks together agreeing on anything, it's pretty impressive.
You also have another book out, and this is another new one?
Yes, sir.
And what is this one?
Well, it's a voter's handbook, Effective Solutions to America's Problems, and there really are resolutions to these problems. And honestly, I wrote this without having any intention or thought of being involved in another political campaign, but it talks about health care, education, the failed policy of death of capital punishment, which, regardless of your philosophy, isn't working. Getting into responsible criminal justice issues and rehabilitation, that sort of thing. I even recommend we go on the metric system, which is certainly something else. And you said I'm running for vice president with Governor Gary Johnson. It's amazing because he, from a totally different perspective, has come out to pretty much the same analysis that I have on all of these really important issues, like education. You know, today, the tie you're wearing, and I like it, by the way, you chose how much to spend, where to go, what to buy. Like all other consumer goods, that's how we get reasonable goods for reasonable prices. But education is completely different than that. Education is funded from the top up. So the federal government spends all this money, keeps a bunch of it, then gives it to the states, who keep a bunch of it for their administrative costs, then give it to the school districts to do the same, give it to the schools. They use a lot of administrative costs, and then it finally gets to the teacher. Well, it isn't working. Today, our schools are failing our children. So if you allow it to be funded from the bottom up, just like your tie or your shoes or anything else, that gives the parents the ability to decide where and how their children should be educated. And they will then be able to take their child to the school